This is Tom Fox. Welcome to the newest edition in the Compliance Podcast Network. My latest podcast, Compliance and Coronavirus. As the voice of compliance, I wanted to start a podcast which will help bring both clarity and sanity to the field of compliance, the compliance practitioner, and indeed the compliance profession during this worldwide health and healthcare crisis. Taking up a variety of topics as diverse as working from home to sporting events, to the role of the board of directors, to crisis management, to the role of supply chains. We will look at all of these in this podcast. If you have a topic you'd like covered on compliance and coronavirus, please let me know. I'd be happy to do a podcast on it. In this episode, I visit with Sam Abadir, Director of Industry Solutions, and Carrie Penman, Chief Risk and Compliance Officer, both at Navex Global, about a paper they jointly co-authored, 6 tips to go from disaster recovery to business continuity. I know you will find it useful. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. And today I am pleased to be joined by Carrie Penman, Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at Navex Global, and Sam Abadir. Sam is the Director of Industry Solutions at Navex Global. First of all, thank you guys both for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you for having me, Tom. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be with you.
So you guys, I thought, wrote a really good article that was recently posted in Navex Global's Risk and Compliance Matters blog site entitled 6 Tips to Go from Disaster Recovery to Business Continuity Planning. And I was wondering if I could maybe start with the basic question of what's the difference in disaster recovery and business continuity?
I'll take that one. Thanks. You know, for a long time, a lot of people have thought that business continuity is disaster recovery, right? And you know, disaster recovery is really kind of born out of the IT world. You know, when IT systems were brought up for accounting and then they went down, people wanted to know how we were going to bring them up. So they build these step-by-step plans. And a lot of organizations, and sadly a lot of organizations today, still look at their business continuity program as a disaster recovery program run by their IT department. But if you think about your business as a whole, there's all sorts of things that need some sort of, continuity and resiliency. Your business continuity plans are exactly that. How do you keep your business running during an interruption? And that very well and quite often excludes IT. In fact, there's a whole slew of different types of business continuity plans. You have your continuity of operations planning. That's kind of your blip in your production or your blip in your software management or whatever that might be. That's not a full-blown disaster. Critical infrastructure plans. You have information system contingency plans, which are, again, different. And then occupant emergency plans, which is, if there's a bomb scare or, a hostage taking inside your office. All these things require, pre-planned thoughts in order to keep your business running and running smooth. Does that help?
It certainly does. Really, one of the powerful things about the article, or what struck me and why I wanted to visit with you all about it, was that you listed several points that a compliance practitioner, a business executive, or really anyone else can utilize when moving towards a business continuity mindset. And I'm just going to list them out. Empower your people, enlist your star employees, pay attention to third parties, don't forget compliance, plan with ethics in mind, and make resiliency an organizational initiative. I was wondering, Sam, if you might be able to give a little flesh to those points on what do you see as the key elements?
Yeah, certainly. And I helped write that article. So those are the, very much key elements in designing a good continuity plan. The first one I think that you talked about was empowering your people. And if you take a step back and you look at business continuity as a subset of operational risk management, right? It's kind of the extreme end of operational risk management. Then empowering your people really makes sense because your people are your first line of defense. You have to understand that your people actually understand your business, and they may understand your business better than the business managers who are writing the processes down in a Visio document or a Gliffy type document. So empowering your people to understand when things are going bad, and to actually manage that risk before it becomes failure, but also to get their input of, hey, why are we doing this? What does it really mean? What happens if we stop these items? Things like that. Those all become very, very important people. And kind of moving to the next one, enlist your star employees. You will always find in your organization that you have, your leaders on your org chart, but you'll also have your natural born leaders. Maybe they're the younger or less tenured people who are going to be tomorrow's org chart leaders. But you do have to enlist your star employees, because during times of crisis, people will listen to both those types of folks, and we have to understand who they are, where they are, and also get their input, right? Getting their input during the planning, not just during the crisis, but getting their input during the planning really either gives you a good sounding board, a good health check, or good operational information for your plan. And I think the third one that you said was pay attention to third parties. And boy, I could talk about this one here for 2 hours. This is really a big deal. As organizations become more digital, and as organizations outsource more and more items, your third parties are absolutely critical to your business continuity plans. They're also absolutely critical to the operations of your business. So when you are planning your business continuity, make sure that you identify the steps where any third party might be involved. Have that type of relationship codified in the contract for support during support during business continuity operations, business continuity testing, and business continuity related events, because you'll need them and you'll be sorely lost without them. I'll give one more point on third parties too, right? If you want to make sure that your business is running well, right? Most businesses buy things from third parties and then or get services from third parties. They make something or they do something with a value add and they sell it to a customer. A lot of people forget that the customer is also a third party. Look at your customers as part of your business continuity plan about how you're going to support them, how you're going to communicate with them, and how you're going to enforce contracts with them, or work with them and be partners with them as part of your planning, because it's as critical as the suppliers and other folks like that are bringing things into you.
Carrie, as the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at Navex, I was wondering if you might be able to speak to the compliance and ethics points in that list, which again were don't forget compliance and plan with ethics in mind.
Thanks, Tom. And I think, we know well that when a company's management is in crisis mode, it's really easy to neglect some of the priorities like compliance. And I know both you and I have been hearing some stories about cuts to compliance budgets and staffing. And that's unfortunate, because this is a very high-risk time for organizations with the pressures to make up lost revenue. And so I really think it's the worst time to be losing focus on compliance. And so in really good, solid business continuity planning, I think compliance risk is a priority, and that the compliance risk assessment that goes along with the business continuity plan would help an organization identify the contractual and the ethical and the legal requirements to ensure that nothing is missed. And I think with a disaster recovery and plan in place before the adverse event occurs, the compliance risk will, I think, have already been identified, and the organization should just go to focusing on the execution of that risk mitigation plan, rather than, I think, losing some important time in planning on the fly if you were not prepared. And I think we're seeing the longer the recovery period, the more likelihood that there could be of neglecting compliance without a plan in place. And I think I just want to spend a minute, because you mentioned the point we made about ethics and planning with ethics in mind. The pandemic has put ethics squarely in the spotlight for a lot of organizations. And, I strongly believe that people and organizations are going to be judged by how they handle this adversity And, as Sam said, the leaders are going to be rising to the occasion. But, leaders and organizations that are making some short-term decisions may face consequences later, good or bad. And one example is, I think, the way organizations will be judged by the treatment of employees during this period of time. I think we've seen in some situations companies cutting salaries and laying off workers, but then rewarding the executives with bonuses. And this will not be forgotten. And I think if people perceive companies as unethical, I think those companies are going to have a pretty tough time finding talent after the pandemic and keeping people motivated. I think people are still job hunting, and some good people could peel off, and that would be a serious loss. So I think leaders are making decisions quickly during disaster recovery, and for those organizations that haven't prepared, really run the risk of making poor, uninformed decisions and potentially unethical decisions as well.
Sam, if I could turn to you for the final point, which is make resiliency an organizational initiative. And I guess my question here is this a declarative statement, or is this an action item? Is this something that starts at the top and really imbues all the way through an organization? How do you make that change?
Well, whenever I think about that last bullet, and I don't remember if it made it into the article or not, but there's a quote attributed to Ben Franklin. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And it can't be more simple than that. And, if you look at it from that standpoint, that change needs to start at the top, but needs to be embraced by every single manager in their organization, every single person in the organization. At the very least, you have to plan out your day and how you're going to be successful in your day. But for the operations of your company, for you to succeed with the mission of helping your customers and bringing value to the market, if you fail to plan for events like this, or even worse, events like a giant fire or a supplier failure, or it could go on and on and on. But if you're not doing that, your organization won't be resilient, and you just won't be meeting the goals that you set out to do, and you won't be. If you take a step back to what Carrie was saying about ethics, this is clearly an ethical mandate, right? You have to plan for these things, because if you're a company, you've employed people, you're supporting your customers, you've made contracts with other third parties, and if you can't live up to those obligations, that's more than just a contractual failure. You've lost the trust, and you've breached your contract with your customers and your suppliers. It has to start at the top, and you have to take a look at it with that type of importance of making sure that you can support the community that you decided to be part of.
Sam and Carrie, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I was wondering if listeners wanted more information, where would you suggest they go?
I would suggest that you go to the Navex Global website. There we have a number of resources, including a link to a webinar that we did on this topic, as well as the blog article that, Tom, you were mentioning. And we just want to thank you so much for inviting us to participate in this session with you today.
Yes, thank you for your time.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Compliance and Coronavirus. This is the only B2B podcast which brings clear and sane information for both the compliance professional and the business executive. If I could ask you to do one thing, if you could tell one person about this podcast, I'm trying to get the word out about this most unique podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network. So if you could tell one person about it, send them a copy, send them a link, do something to help me publicize this podcast, I would greatly appreciate it. Compliance and Coronavirus is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network, and it appears Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of each week. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode.